So there are a few things to note. One is that Paul is assigned to be the apostle to the Gentiles, but that hasn't happened yet. So at this time, the followers of Jesus are all Jewish followers of Jesus. They're called Jewish Christians in most texts today. And they worship together with the traditional Jews in the synagogues. Later, they will be kicked out as separatists. But for now, there are Jews and Jewish followers of Jesus worshiping as one faith. The people who we call Christians weren't called Christians at that time. So actually the name Christian is an insult. It came from the city of Antioch, where Greeks were trying to make fun of these followers of Jesus by calling them little saviors or Christians, little messiahs. And the last thing I just want to note, and these things are just for fun for me to say, is that Paul's famous thorn in the flesh, we don't exactly know what it is because he doesn't tell us, but I and a lot of other people believe it's very likely that he is going blind. This story may have something to do with that, but also in the book of Galatians, there's a part where he writes something with his own hand. So he has multiple secretaries. He speaks the words, they write them down. But in Galatians, near the end, he has this part where he says, I, Paul, write this part with thine own hand. See what large letters I use. In other words, his eyesight was so bad, in order for him to read his own handwriting, he would have to scribe it in giant letters. Fun facts for the day. Like many biblical figures, from Abram to Abraham, from Sarai to Sarah, from Jacob becoming Israel, or Simon being called Peter, God changes a man called Saul so dramatically that his whole identity shifts, so much so that he becomes a completely new person, Paul. In short, no matter how dark a person's past, God's grace can turn things around. God can shake us from our preconceived ideas and create in us the kind of changes we need to get exactly where God is taking us, whether we want to go or not. In this morning's reading, Saul is about 40 years old. He's moving up quickly through the ranks of the Jewish religious institutions, and he's making a pretty great name for himself. Paul was born in modern-day Turkey, in Tarsus. He was a Roman citizen by birth, and he was a Hebrew from a very conservative branch of the faith from the time. He was deeply committed to Judaism and also specifically to the law of Judaism. And he devoted his life to God as he saw God revealed in the law. Saul was perhaps the most educated Pharisee in his day. According to Luke, and recorded in Acts 22, verse 3, Paul was born of Tarsus, but brought up in Jerusalem and under Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, and was thoroughly trained in the law of the Hebrew ancestors. Paul's mentor was famous. Gamaliel was a highly respected Pharisee and teacher of the law in the first century, widely regarded as one of the most eminent rabbis and teachers in all of Jewish history, and certainly in that era. He was known for his wisdom, kindness, fairness, and his influence among the other Jewish leaders like him who were a part of the Sanhedrin, a legal religious court made up of 71 different elders who were rabbi. Interestingly, both Gamaliel and another one of his most famous students, Rabbi Hillel, had rather famously suggested that this new branch of Judaism, calling themselves the Way, which followed Jesus, should be treated always with respect and understanding. Both Hillel and Gamaliel asked the other leaders to deal with them leniently. Saul, however, disagreed with Gamaliel, and he aligned himself with a man named Shemaiah, who was the chief priest. Shemaiah had suggested the death penalty for all members of the Way as heretics. Next, Paul went to Shemaiah against his mentor's wishes, requesting a stamp of approval to stamp out the Way. And so, Saul set out on his own as a vigorous opponent of the early Christian movement, actively persecuting believers and overseeing the imprisonment and even the execution of some of the followers of Jesus. With legal documents from his court, the Sanhedrin, it granted him the power to capture his adversaries, moving them to Jerusalem, putting them in prison, and sending them to courts, where Shammai would certainly have them killed. Now, it's essential to understand Saul. Saul was actually a man of immense faith. He was a kind religious person, usually. And Saul believed greatly that he was defending the Jewish tradition from what he saw as the heresy of the wild. He thought he was doing the right thing by rounding up the followers of Jesus for trial. And that is exactly what he set out to do. But it turns out God had a different plan. Have you ever done that? The wrong thing, but for the right reason? Sadly, Charles Colson was right when he wrote, "Few things are so deadly as the misguided sense of compassion." That is where Saul sat. He sat in a place where he purported to love, but that love for one community quickly delved into the destruction of another. As the saying goes, my heart was in the right place. It's just my brain went on vacation. Around 5 years after the resurrection, on a walk to the city of Damascus, Saul has a visionary experience whereby his misguided intentions become a path from violent destruction and change into a place of praise and a place of hope. At the time, faith in the Way had been growing very quickly. In response, Saul went to the leaders in Jerusalem to get his permission to round them up, and it says both men and women uniquely. Because for the first time in Jewish history, women were accepting a new religious view on their own without having to convert to whatever their husband did. And yet, it is precisely this path of failures that Saul encounters the risen Christ within. A brilliant light surrounds him. He falls to the ground, stripped of his certainty as much as of his sight. In this vulnerable state, Jesus' question pierces Saul's heart. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And with these words, Saul's mission collapses. He finds himself blinded and led by the hand into the city of Damascus, his previous confidence now shattered. That happens sometimes with God. We find ourselves going about our own business, believing or doing one thing, only to discover that we were wrong all along and need a little bit of correction. In short, Saul has a real come to Jesus moment. And because of that, he has to rethink his entire life. While the story is described as a literal event and also a vision experience, its symbolism is perhaps more crucial to the story. Whatever historically exactly took place, it was a divine intervention, and it turned Saul into Paul. How many times in life, like Saul, have we spent pursuing our own well-meaning agendas only to miss God's true calling for our lives? Have you ever done that? Perhaps, like me, maybe something in your life is less a carefully orchestrated symphony and more an improvisational jazz kazoo play. Sometimes we can become so sure we're right about things that we forget to check and see if we're missing the absolute truth of it. I've come to realize sometimes God lets you believe you're an expert at something just so he can very dramatically reveal to you that you've been microwaving the tinfoil all along. I'm pretty sure my resume should include expert in unintentionally detouring from divine purpose, and I suspect I'm not alone. What areas do you think in your life might prevent you from seeing a true path? You know, the catch-22 of this, of course, is that you can't see what you can't see. And so sometimes God has to intervene, and it's rarely comfortable when he does so. Many times in my life, I've found that I had to course correct, from changing my mind on the place of women in ministry when confronted with better information, to me being rather staunchly against infant baptism at one time, an idea I quickly dropped when learning about the shift from the first to the second generation of Christians, or my once believing in some form of verbal plenary, an idea that the very words of the Bible came from the mouth of God, rather than through human and divine elements working together. And I came to new understandings. I've gone through some rather significant developments in my life and faith, and none of it was enjoyable, because I, like most people, really don't like being proven wrong or admitting that I've done wrong to others because of my own silly ideas. But things have worked out for the better. And I've learned and grown a lot. I suspect so have you. Dare I say, if you're never uncomfortable with your God's guidance, then you might be mistaking the echo of your own voice for his. Correction from God is the spiritual equivalent of realizing you've been wearing your shirt inside out all day. Catching it is a little embarrassing, but it's better when you find out. In any case, for 3 days, Saul is blind and confronted with the very Jesus that he had rejected. He's had to face a very terrible truth. He was wrong about Jesus. He was wrong about the way. And instead of being some great hero of the faith like he believed he was in fact just a violent crusader, doing not the Lord's work, but Saul's own. Saul was physically blinded and was later led by hand into the city's west side down Straight Street. For 3 days, he lives in complete darkness, both physically, but more importantly, spiritually. And most importantly, Saul is mourning, trying to come to terms with what has happened, with who he's been, with who he will be, and who he needs to become, now that he's been confronted by this new reality. Next, there are 2 dreams described. Saul has one and is told that a man called Ananias would come and heal him. And Ananias has one where he is told to go to Saul. Now for Saul, this would be extremely uncomfortable. Ananias was a popular, beloved community member and someone Saul had almost certainly planned to capture and imprison and put to trial. Ananias knew full well Saul's intent for him, and going to see Saul must have seemed like the most dangerous thing he could ever do in the world. And yet he goes nonetheless. How many times in your life have you felt that still, small voice asking you to do something for God, but you weren't very comfortable with it? Imagine the courage it must have taken for him to go and embrace the very one who had brought so much suffering to his community. Ananias appears only here in the Scripture, but Ananias is a brave man and a hero. When Ananias arrives, the first thing he does is call Saul brother, lays hands on him, and prays. With that, we're told that something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. Probably not just physically, but spiritually too. Saul is then immediately baptized and almost immediately begins a ministry, not against the way, but to the way. From persecutor to proclaimer, Saul's failures are not the end, but rather the foundation of his new purpose. What or who has God used in your life to shine a light on your mistakes and make you reassess? Where right now can God's grace help to open our eyes to see life in a new way? Have you ever experienced a moment of clarity that shook your worldview or changed your purpose? Paul of Tarsus was instrumental in shaping Christian theology, expanding Christianity beyond its Jewish roots, establishing the organizational structures that created churches, and he's influenced Western culture and thought for at least 2,000 years. While his teachings are sometimes subject to interpretation and debate, his impact on the world is immense and undeniable. Had he got his way, and Jesus not confronted him, he would have simply been lost to history as yet another tyrant in a long line of destructive fools. The story of Saul becoming Paul is a reminder that our failures do not and cannot define us. Instead, they become opportunities for growth and transformation through grace. Like Saul, we find ourselves on paths of misunderstanding and often misguided aims. But just as Christ met Saul on the road to Damascus, he often meets us in our moments of failure, offering us light, offering us forgiveness, and giving us new direction. Like Paul, are we willing to confront our own errors? Are we willing to change direction? Like Ananias, how willing are we to step out in faith and share the hope that we've found, regardless of our fears and worries? Where can God bring new life and purpose for you? How can we trust more in God's power to transform us from dark to light? God did it with Saul. God does it all the time. And God can do it continually with us too. So may we, like Ananias, respond with faith and courage to God's call, participating in God's redemptive work in and through us. And like Paul, let us embrace our journey from failures at times to faith, trusting in the transformative power of God's grace to guide us to our true callings. And though it may not always be comfortable, may it be a blessing to the world around us and a chance for us to course correct and make what's wrong right. Thanks be to God from Saul to Paul and wherever he confronts you too. Amen.